The night was still when we set up camp deep in the woods. My friends and I had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. The trees loomed tall around us, their branches whispering in the breeze. We laughed and joked, oblivious to the sense of unease that was slowly creeping in. It was around midnight when the silence was broken by a distant, rhythmic chanting. At first, we thought it was just the wind playing tricks on us, but the chanting grew louder, a chilling harmony that seemed to seep through the trees. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to investigate. We followed the sound, our flashlights piercing the darkness. The forest seemed to twist and shift around us as we walked, the chanting guiding our steps. After what felt like hours, we stumbled upon a clearing bathed in an eerie orange glow. At the center of the clearing was a large, fire-lit circle surrounded by hooded figures, their faces hidden in the shadows. The cultists chanted in a language I didn't understand, their voices blending into a terrifying chorus. In the middle of the circle, a wooden altar stood with what looked like an animal sacrifice laid upon it. I felt a shiver run down my spine as the smell of burning flesh reached my nostrils. Panic set in as we realized we had been spotted. The chanting stopped abruptly, and the cultists turned toward us. Their eyes were hollow, almost lifeless, and their expressions were a mix of curiosity and malevolence. One of them, dressed in a dark robe adorned with strange symbols, stepped forward. He held a knife that glinted in the firelight. "You should not have come here," he said in a voice that was both soothing and unsettling. "This land belongs to the divine, and those who intrude must be purified." We backed away, but the path we had taken seemed to have vanished. The trees closed in around us, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes. It was as if the forest itself was conspiring against us. The cultists began to advance, their chanting starting up again, louder and more insistent. We sprinted through the woods, branches slapping against our faces, the sound of the cultists' footsteps echoing behind us. We finally burst into the open, only to find ourselves at the edge of a cliff overlooking a churning, dark abyss. There was no way back. The cultists' chanting grew louder, almost deafening. We were trapped, our breaths coming in ragged gasps as we looked for a way out. But the forest was relentless. The ground began to tremble and a cold wind whipped around us. Just when I thought it was over, a blinding light appeared on the horizon. We ran toward it, desperate for escape. The light led us back to our campsite, where the fire was still burning. But as we looked around, the forest was silent again, as if nothing had happened. The cultists were gone. The chanting faded into the night. We packed up in a hurry and left, the eerie glow of the forest still haunting our minds. We never spoke of that night again, but every rustle in the dark, every whisper of the wind made me shiver. The forest had been a stage for something dark and ancient, and we had been lucky to escape its grasp. The Watcher. Elena and Jake returned from their honeymoon, eager to begin their new life in Timber Creek. Their cabin, secluded at the edge of a dark forest, felt like a perfect escape. Yet, as night fell on their first evening, an oppressive silence settled around them, and an uneasy tension filled the air. "Did you hear that?" Elena's voice trembled as she stared into the dense trees. "It's just the wind," Jake replied, but even he felt a chill creep up his spine. As the days passed, strange occurrences began. Shadows flickered at the edges of their vision, and whispers danced through the trees. Each night they heard rustling outside, a sound that seemed to mimic their movements. Jake chalked it up to local wildlife, but Elena sensed a sinister presence lurking in the darkness. One evening, they ventured into the woods under the pale moonlight. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sounds being the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. Suddenly, Elena glimpsed something in the shadows, a figure darting between the trees. It moved unnaturally, almost like a predator stalking its prey. "Did you see that?" she gasped, gripping Jake's arm tightly. "See what?" he asked, his voice strained. The next morning, Elena found large, distorted tracks circling the cabin. They looked almost human, but were grotesquely elongated. She showed them to Jake, but he dismissed her concerns as paranoia. That night, a storm rolled in, the wind howling like a creature in pain. As they huddled together, A soft scratching at the door shattered the fragile calm. Jake opened it cautiously, revealing only the torrential rain and darkness. "Let's just go to bed," he suggested, his tone forced. But sleep eluded them, and nightmares twisted through Elena's mind. Visions of a gaunt figure with skin stretched tight over its bones, eyes burning with hunger. The following evening, Jake left for supplies in town, promising to return quickly. Alone in the cabin, Elena felt the weight of silence pressing down on her. As dusk enveloped the woods, she heard a soft rhythmic tapping at the window. Her heart raced as she approached, peering out into the gloom. A figure stood just beyond the glass, its face obscured by shadows. It looked disturbingly like Jake, but with a twisted smile and eyes that glimmered with malice. She stumbled back, her breath hitching in her throat. "Jake," she called, dread pooling in her stomach. No answer came, only the relentless tapping, growing louder and more insistent. In a surge of panic, she grabbed her phone and called him. "Hello? Elena?" His voice crackled on the line. "Jake, someone's here," she whispered, but the line abruptly went dead. The tapping stopped. Silence enveloped the cabin. Moments later, the door creaked open. A soaked figure stepped inside, Jake, but his face was pale, hollow. "Why didn't you come to the door?" he asked, voice unnaturally calm. "I thought I saw you outside," she stammered, fear tightening her chest. He stepped closer, water pooling around his feet, but his eyes, those eyes, were devoid of warmth. "Elena, we need to leave. Now." Before she could respond, the lights flickered ominously. From the shadows outside, she glimpsed a twisted silhouette watching with a predatory gaze. "Jake, what's happening?" she begged, terror lacing her words. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing her hand. "We're not safe here." They dashed outside, the air thickening with an oppressive weight. The figure had moved closer, its form contorting and shifting grotesquely. "Go!" Jake screamed, but Elena froze, paralyzed by the sight of the creature that wore Jake's face. "Help me!" the thing howled, its voice a horrifying echo. "It's not me." Elena's heart raced as she realized the truth. They were being hunted by a skinwalker, a creature that preyed on the living by mimicking those they loved. With a primal scream, she turned and ran, the forest closing in around her. Branches whipped at her skin as the creature chased them, its breath hot and rancid on the back of her neck. In a clearing illuminated by the cold moonlight, the grotesque figure lunged, revealing a mouth twisted into a mocking grin that mirrored Jake's. "Help me!" it cried, a grotesque blend of Jake's voice and a sinister growl. "Is it you?" Elena screamed, tears streaming down her face. "No! Run!" Jake's voice pierced through the horror. In that moment of clarity, she knew what she had to do. To save herself, she had to leave him behind. With her heart breaking, she fled into the depths of the forest, the cries of her husband fading behind her. Days later, the cabin stood empty, swallowed by shadows. Those who wandered too close spoke in hushed tones of a newlywed couple cursed by the woods, their figures trapped in the trees, eternally dancing in the moonlight, haunted by the skinwalker that wore the skin of their love.